Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Seeds of Light. This is our show for those of you looking to illuminate the path of parenting using the power of astrology. This is for you, whether you're a parent, grandparent, auntie, uncle, or if you have an inner child that you're tending to and would love to learn about the nature of the different zodiac signs and the different planets and just learn more deeply about yourself. I love, and I have referenced this before, but I love how Rick Levine has often said it's never too late to have a happy childhood. Um, I feel that that's like one of the taglines that we need to bring into the show.
That's awesome.
I'm Anna Zaharia, CCO for Astrology Hub, and your host for the show. And today I'm here with astrologer and psychotherapist Lucian Schloss. Did I say your last name right?
Yeah, it's a hard one to say one after the other. Lucian Schloss. Yeah,
Schloss. Okay, wonderful.
yeah,
Thank you so much for being here, Lucian.
yeah. It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I've had this vision of you being on one of our shows for a long time. So this is a bit of a dream come true for me.
Cool.
Today, we're talking about navigating your child's developmental milestones with astrology. But before we dive into that, which is obviously a very, very rich topic, I want to tell you more about Lucian. Lucian has been in private practice as a psychotherapist, astrologer, and family constellation workshop facilitator. His work is informed out of the new mysteries as taught by Rudolf Steiner, Bert Hellinger, Dane Rudhyar, and many others. His focus is on integrating the subtle and spiritual realm into understanding our biography, relationships, and work as our personal mystery school. Lucian is currently completing a book on the unfolding of the soul as seen through biography and planetary cycles. He lives with his wife and 3 children in Corvallis, Oregon. I have so many questions, Lucian, and there's so many different things I would love to go into just from your bio.
Okay.
Um, I'll try to start with just one because I know we have so much to cover, but how does astrology connect to psychotherapy?
For me, because I'm sure uh, I know there's many different ways that people incorporate it. But I was introduced to astrology. I mean, I'd known about astrology, but I really got into it when I was studying to be a psychotherapist at California Institute of Integral Studies. And I took Richard Tarnas's class on Cosmos and Psyche, which that book had just come out, and it totally blew my mind open. And then when I had started my practice, kind of around my Saturn return, someone had recommended another really amazing book, Cycles of Becoming by Alexander Ruperti, where it kind of goes over these kind of developmental cycles over the whole course of the lifetime. And so I was seeing a lot of couples back then and a lot of individuals. And one of the first questions that I would ask my clients is how old they are. Because that, like for me, that right away, even if I didn't have their chart, it would place them in one of these cycles. And without fail, you would see that what was going on in their life kind of fit this like bigger framework of um, soul development throughout the lifetime, so um, almost always seeing clients coming in on their Saturn return, or they're waxing square at 36, or then the Uranus opposition at 43, or there was just always coming in having some sort of crisis at one of these potent times. And so that got me really excited about kind of having this as a framework. to use in psychotherapy. So that's kind of basically how I use it. The other way I find it really useful, besides doing chart readings for individuals, is I love that, like, like I know what's going on in the sky on any given day or week or month, and you see those themes pop up, right? It's like when Mars is retrograding or Venus is retrograding, it's like all the couples start, you know, um, calling, or you get the couple on the brink of the divorce, and it's like, lo and behold, they're 43 and Uranus is going into um, opposition, and those sorts of things. Or like things really just broke down with the on inauguration day, with that Mars Uranus conjunction, making a loose square to the stuff in Aquarius. It was like, I mean, people were just breaking down. So I find, as a therapist, that's just really useful to kind of contextualize it. And then if they're one of my clients who I have their chart and they're open and familiar with astrology, then I get to look and see what it's doing in their chart. And I just kind of let that inform where we go.
So it sounds like for you, astrology is interwoven throughout your psychotherapy practice, even if you're not fully going into the chart. You always have it as a backdrop, and it's
Yeah,
informing how you relate to your clients.
totally. And I feel one of the things that's gotten me excited to work on this book about these 7-year cycles and kind of just the big developmental transits is, I feel like it'd be really useful to a lot of psychotherapists, and you don't even need to like go and uh, go super in depth into astrology to be able to gain a lot of insight, and how to help people based on their age and where they are in the cycle of life.
Mm. I have another question related to your bio. What is our personalized mystery school? Because I want it.
Oh, well, we're all on it. Yeah, let me try to find. I don't want to waste our time looking for a quote, but it comes from a Steiner quote um, that like has always resonated with me. But essentially, which is, that in the old mystery centers, you essentially retreated from life, um, and became the pupil of some sort of master or guru in order to be awakened into the mysteries. And Steiner talks about, that this kind of evolution of the human soul is that now we're kind of, we've entered the point in evolution where the whole world is kind of the mystery school. The people we come into relationship with, like um, the karma that we have to face, the suffering that we go through. This is the mystery. I mean, you see it in different forms of Buddhism or Zen, popping up in the past few hundred years too, where it's like, you come down off the mountain and into the marketplace, and that's kind of what I mean by the mystery center, and then when you're able to incorporate what's going on with the cosmos into that, then it gets really juicy, which is what they were doing in the mystery centers anyway, right? So
Right. Yeah, I love that concept of treating everything in our lives as initiation, and
yeah,
this process of being in the mystery school and studying with the guru, but the guru is like, it's your life and it's constantly
yes,
teaching you.
yeah, even the Steiner has points out, and Steiner's not the only one who said this, I'm just familiar with Steiner, but that most of the good things that happen to us in our life are more kind of grace, right? And of course we should be grateful for them, but that the real meatiness often comes to us and how we have to suffer, right? Like that's kind of where the learning is, in the really difficult relationships, in the stuff we have to experience at work. And like parenting kind of is a huge one of those, right? Like it sounds very cheesy and hackneyed, but like every parent will say like how much they've learned from their children, you know.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember very early on calling Koa my best teacher.
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, I know you started touching on this already, but why are you particularly excited to speak about navigating children's developmental milestones with astrology?
Um, well, I think uh, it's really useful to have a model, even a basic model of just kind of understanding human development and the development of the child that is, beyond maybe just what you can um, read in a psychology book. Um, and a lot of what inspires me from that does come from Waldorf education and kind of the outline of development Steiner gave, um, which is actually deeply astrologically based. I don't know how familiar he was with with that. I do know that he kind of came out of theosophy, and theosophy was very much informed by astrology. So um, uh, I know that did influence it, but looking at the development of the child not just as like a blank slate, right? Um, like some of the premise that Waldorf takes and that I certainly take, and I think a lot of astrology takes, is that you know there is at least a part of us that incarnates from lifetime to lifetime, and that we a part of us picks the moment we're going to be born, picks the parents we're going to have. There's a great quote that I reference a lot where Steiner talks about how children, often the love that parents feel for each other, is actually a reflection of the love of their unborn child, right? So you see this a lot, um, where people come together and fall in love or make a baby, and then it becomes very clear, like, hey, this is not about us, but it was actually the child working from the spiritual world, to inspire their incarnation. um,
Mm.
and I love that idea, um, and I think it's beautiful and it makes a lot of sense.
I love
um,
that line, the child working from the other world to inspire their incarnation. That's
yes.
such a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah, he even will say, like, because there's this whole argument too of, we inherit so many of our characteristics, from our ancestors. And I think in the same lecture, he actually talks about how we will work on our ancestors for many generations before we incarnate. That like we're intimately, both our ancestors who have died, and then both those unborn grandchildren and great great grandchildren are all involved in our mystery school, shall we say, or in our becoming. um, So yeah, that's one of those ideas that like I'm not clairvoyant. I haven't experienced that, but it's a beautiful freaking idea. And just living with that as a hypothesis makes life pretty interesting.
Mm.
Yeah. Um,
So, what are the developmental cycles?
okay. Um, well, loosely, there are these in, I was first kind of introduced to them through Steiner's work, and there's a whole um, area of work that comes out of anthroposophy and Steiner called biographical counseling, where you look at these 7-year developmental cycles. And then it just so happens that these 7-year cycles really correlate quite nicely with the cycles of Saturn, meaning Saturn makes a hard aspect every 7 years, or a
Right.
little
So
bit more.
it's the Saturn square, then the
The
Saturn
first
opposite.
Saturn's, yeah, then the opposition. So it's, you know, Saturn when you're born, then at around 7.5, you get the first Saturn square, which is like first quarter moon kind of cycle. And that's when you get the change of teeth, like the actual adult teeth come in, which I'll get more into in a bit. And then you have the Saturn opposition at 14, 15, um, which is like the full moon. And then at 21, you've got the waning square. And then at 28, 29 is the Saturn return. So that's a full Saturn cycle. Um, and, Saturn rules time. I see Saturn, like even the symbol of Saturn, of like the cross of matter bearing down on the soul. I mean, it almost looks like the cross we have to bear, right? So it's this like incarnational force, right? Saturn is the stuff we have to deal with, or some people refer to Saturn as the Lord of Karma. So often at these 7-year cycles, there can be like a real turning points in our kind of destiny or in karma, um, and certainly they have. I mean, it works in many ways. The other part of the 7-year cycle is it also fits into the movements of Uranus, right? So it takes Uranus 84 years to go all the way back to where it was when we were born. So that's 12 sevens. And so Uranus, in many ways, is the opposite kind of archetype or impulse of Saturn. Like if Saturn's bringing form and structure in the past, Uranus wants us to individualize, break through. It's the Promethean kind of impulse. And so these two work together at these junctures, to kind of like hold this structure of development, but also bring up opportunities for evolution. Um, so that's a loose way of looking at it. Um, and another aspect that comes into it that I'll talk about today that is useful is that each one of these 7-year cycles is ruled by one of the visible planets. And you use the Chaldean order of planets, which goes from the planets closest to the Earth to those that are farthest away. So Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. So the first 7 years are ruled by the moon, but you can even break up each of those 7 years. Like, the first year would be the moon year of the moon cycle, the second year, the Mercury year of the moon cycle, and onward. And then interestingly, Steiner took the sun years and he made 3 of them. So 21 to 28 is a sun year, 28 to 35 is a sun cycle, and 35 to 42 is a sun cycle, which is what I use. It seems to make sense, and it fits into his cosmology of, from 21 to 42 is really this like development of the self, of the soul, um, through this kind of mystery school of life. And if things go well, the idea is at 42, you actually are really show up in a way, to do your real work, which is another thing I love about this. I love about astrology, and what I love about this model is, it instead of looking at your prime as your physiological prime, it's like, no, you're not even like a fully matured, incarnated human really until you hit, 35 to 42, right? Um, so I like that model.
Mm. So, wow. I mean, that definitely gives us a very rich backstory to work with as we're looking at the developmental
Yeah,
stages for our child and wherever they are. Can we start with looking at the first 7 years,
yeah,
and how the moon can help inform how we work with that stage?
yes. Um, so the first 7 years, um, and I'll speak more generally because we can get really into the detail, and if people are more interested in this, they can, I can point them to other books, or they can wait till I finish my book and read it, because this is the sort of stuff I'll be going into. But the first 7 years are ruled by the moon, and I think the symbology of the moon is perfect for these first 7 years, which is, um, even they're able to show now in neuroscience that children's brains are constantly in theta wave states. So they're kind of in that dream, half awake, um, half asleep. They have one foot in this world and one foot in the other world. And the key thing with children under the age of 7 is that they are just absorbing their environment. They are literally moon-like, right? Whatever the sun is shining on them is whatever life is shining on them is that which they absorb. And it's so trying to teach children under the age of 7, telling them to do something verbally, does not really work. It's like they are watching you with their whole being, um, and not just their head, right? I mean, you see that with really young children. They just absorb it all in. Everything in their sensory environment comes in, from the color of the walls to the tone of your voice, and it shapes their organism. Um, so I think that this is such a key piece, when we're parenting children that young, to just remember about, um, they are their environment, right?
Mm.
They are your posture, right? They are your tone of voice, um, all of that. It's also that initial imprinting between, mother and child, and how they're going to take in the outside world and start to digest it. Um, I think Fritz Perls, who started Gestalt therapy, his original idea was, if you want to know the basis of someone's neuroses or psychology, it's like, watch how they eat, because that's like the basic, how they going to take in the world and digest it. Remember when I first heard that, I was like, oh man, that makes total sense.
Wow.
Bite it off more than I chew, and then I don't.
Wow. Well,
Yeah,
that's a really fascinating way to think about it. Um, I'm now thinking about how big of a difference there is between the way that I eat and my son. Like he'll refuse to eat with a fork
Yeah.
most of the time, and we'll just go in like hand first.
Yeah.
And I like to have my small fork and like small bite-sized pieces
Yeah.
and start with my salad. And I just like have a certain
Which
order.
I don't know you that well, but that it makes sense to me, right?
Yeah.
Like from how I do know you, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah.
Okay.
It's
So,
how we take in the world. And then you can play with it. So this this part of it largely comes from Steiner and from Waldorf educators, but the part that I've been playing with more is like, okay, look at your moon, look at what sign it is in, look at big aspects to it, and what does it say about those first 7 years of your life? What does it say about what your environment was and like how you take in the world, um, or what you look or need from the world? It's really interesting. um, and if the sun is what you're taking in, if that's what's being brought to you by life, let's say, how are you filtering it in through the senses?
mm, wow, there's so much richness just in that. And there's multiple levels for parents to work with this technique, depending on how astro curious or astro comfortable you are. Because even just looking at the first 7 years as ruled by the moon and tuning into some of the qualities that you were speaking to, that in itself provides a really rich framework to just understand what your child is going through and the kinds of things you can do to support them.
Hmm.
And then you can go so much further by bringing in their astrological chart and looking at the
Yeah.
sign of the moon and looking at the sign of the sun. Um, so for those of you that haven't pulled charts, but you would love to, you can go to astrologyhub.com/astro charts and get your chart done for free right there, or your child's chart. And what I love about them is that they'll kind of pull out some of the information for you. So if you're not comfortable looking at a chart yet, they'll just tell you your moon is in Aries.
Right.
So um, it just gives you a great starting point, and you can just have that handy as you watch this episode and other episodes, and it'll just help give you so much more insight into how to navigate this path of parenting using astrology.
Another interesting thing with the moon would also be to look at the moon phase, right? That'd be another kind of insight of, like, all right, a lot of children are born with the full moon, but how does this, it's like just taking everything in. And also full moon phase is also like having that kind of um, real experience of subject and object, right? Where a new moon would be more visceral, more unconscious, more that energy would just kind of flow together. Um, so,
Right.
um,
And then, of course, just to state the obvious, the moon phase is the relationship between moon and sun.
yes,
And if you want a really embodied experience of that, you can go under the sky and just see where is
right,
the sun and where is the moon and what is that phase that the moon is in when they're in these positions. So you could see the
right,
square, or you could see
yeah,
the full moon rise when the sun is setting. And then that'll give you extra insights into that moon phase as well.
absolutely, yeah, to get a embodied experience of what that feels like. Um,
So,
yeah,
are we ready to move on to the second 7 to 14 phase?
sure, yeah. Um, So a big transition during this time, and it's going what I was saying about Saturn at these Saturn cycles, is at around 6 or 7, you start getting the change of dentation,
Mm.
um, which Steiner was just a really, really good observer of everything. So, 100 years ago, he was saying this is a huge deal that prior to the age of 7, children are not actually ready for intellectual learning, that they're still living in a symbolic kind of picture consciousness, and that they're just absorbing what's around them, and that play is the best way for them to do that, because they take what they're absorbing and then they're able to start digesting it. And then the teeth change at that first Saturn square, and with that, the prefrontal cortex also lights up, which is that's when they start to be ready for more academic learning. And then 7 to 14 is ruled by Mercury and the kind of symbol of Mercury, which I think makes a lot of sense. Um, I mean, whether it's playing with their peers, they're moving around all the time. Um, Another interesting thing about Mercury is traditionally Mercury rules the lungs, and uh, you could consider that like this is very much a lung phase of development where we're taking in all the information we can get from the outside world and trying to bring it into the organism. And it can be a little overwhelming. It's like, you've kind of left that womb of early childhood, and you're more in that exploring and um, learning phase. And also getting those first experiences of what it's like to do those kind of the Mercury form of thinking, right? It's like I take something in and then I can actually think about it or learn about how the world works, or memorize the times tables or learn how to read. So once again, it's something you can look in the chart, look where Mercury is, see how that influenced those seven years. Um, and often there are clear moments in our biography where it's like, oh yeah, when I turned 7.5, that's when my parents divorced and I switched schools, right? Or when I turned 14, we moved cross country, and or I got my first skateboard, or I learned to play the harp, and that was like my, big moment of truth. Another thing I find interesting is that Steiner talks in those first 7 years that like really what we're born with is largely borrowed from our parents and the cosmos. So all baby teeth look the same, right? They're not individual. There's no personality in baby teeth, and he actually says they're like literally cosmic teeth that we're borrowing from the cosmos.
Mm.
And if you look at most children's bodies before the age of 7, I mean, maybe some are a little more plump or thin or tall, or, you see some of these traits, but for the most part, most kids' bodies just have this kind of like almost uniform, right? They all kind of look the same, right? And there also seem to be weightless, right? Like a 5-year-old can run, for 16 hours a day and like not get tired. But then when there's this change of teeth, it's like that that like incarnating more into their physical organism is so experienced, and the
Mm.
adult teeth come in and they're very individualized, or like they start looking more goofy, or there's like you really see this mix of like what's given to us from the cosmos and then like the individual soul trying to embody and kind of formed the organism.
Wow. That's so interesting. And I was just having this idea while you're speaking about Saturn at these key turning points,
Hmm.
as of Saturn kind of as a midwife,
Mm-hmm.
midwifing this new part of you that you're birthing, um, and assisting you in that growth, and or I guess that furthering your embodiment, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like a ever evolving birth that you're going through.
Right.
Um,
Well, and Uranus is there too, of like, you know, how are you as an individual gonna come in, and how is your own unique genius gonna express itself? And there's always there's always the growing pains.
mm,
Um, uh, not necessarily all the time, because we also have individual transits that really impact us, but almost always we'll see these thresholds between these 7-year cycles as being like really um, pivotal points. Often parents will become parents around the time of one of these Saturnian, Uranian cycles, so um,
yes.
28, 28, 29, 35, 36 um, are big deals. Um,
I have
and
a
there's more. Go ahead.
I just have a question about with Mercury ruling basically this phase
Mm.
of development. Would you pay particular attention to transiting Mercury during those 7 years?
I have not gotten that far. I've paid a lot of attention to the moon for people, and the moon piece. I think this would all. I mean, I essentially this has the elements to be a kind of like Time Lord technique. I don't know that a lot of people have used it as that, but I think it would be worth playing with it. I know I'm starting to.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, it would be really interesting to look at, any major transits to Mercury, or any, our children between 7 and 14, maybe is their antenna tuned into Mercury in a different way. Um,
Mm,
that might be
right.
interesting to look at. Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to talk about for 7 to 14 ruled by Mercury, or do you want to move on to the next?
There's a couple other big moments in that are related to other cycles. There's the nodal reversal, where the um, nodes of the moon basically go upside down. So the south node will be on the north node, and the north node on the south node. And those also tend to be very potent times, karmically. Maybe that's when a friend comes in, or there can often be that quickening of that sense of self, where you really feel separate from your your peers or your parents, or you think maybe you were adopted or came from a strange planet. But there's a major kind of quickening at that age. Um, and then the Jupiter cycle too, that comes in the 12th year, which is another important one in terms of like expansion and growth. Um, yeah,
So for the nodal reversal, that's age 9, right?
it's about 9.5. Yeah, yeah,
9.
yeah. And in Waldorf schools, like they call it the 9.5 year change, and it's like tends to be a little of a rough time. Um, yeah, that experience of being different. And then 14 to 21, like I think I was saying earlier is, ruled by Venus. And as I said before, on top of, um, kind of the development or birth of sexuality, um, there's also what I said earlier about, you know, the religion of youth is beauty, right? Whether that's music or physical beauty or um, very much like developing those social and emotional organs. And also, it has that uh, that piece of which I think is a nice way to think of the Venus function, is actually what we sympathize with and how that informs our identity, right? That, all right, these are my friends, these are the people I want to look like and have harmony with. This is how I want to appear to the world. There's a lot of that, um, that kind of going on. And like I was saying, it's also a great time. It's too bad we don't do more of this in public schools, but the arts are so important kind of at this age, as a way to start like interfacing with these inner feelings, in some sort of expressive way. Um, and then partnership and relationship. I think for some people it's just their group of friends, but for a lot of us that's this first, like, experience of falling in love or having crushes, or the kind of Libra archetype of like what would it be like to be a unit, um, are all kind of Venusian things.
And this really kind of emphasizes as well that need for understanding like the social construct and the social flow and how you fit into it, and
Right,
or how you can fit into it, and
right.
um
Am I popular? Right, like
right.
that's a, you know that's a kind of Venus question. Do people like me?
Right.
um, yeah,
So just like we did with the previous phases of development, this is another one where you could go to Venus in the chart and get a lot
yeah,
more insight.
yeah. I feel like that works really. I mean, when you're playing with archetypes, and when, I mean, there's so many ways you can see all this stuff in your chart, but um, I do find that there can be rich meaning and symbolism. Like when I go and look at where my Venus is, um, and how that's representative of what 14 to 21 was all about, like makes total sense. And then you see the transition then back to your son, um, at 21, and often you'll see this really big shift. um,
Mhm. Yeah, I can reflect on that. So you start
yeah,
bringing yourself in as an example, and that's actually one of my questions is can
yeah,
we talk about, can you give us an example? So do you want to tell us more about
sure, yeah.
your own
So
reflection?
I have Venus, in Pisces, in the fifth whole sign house, or fourth if you're using porphyry. And I had this very, 14 to 21 was all about music, right? Which I feel fits in with that kind of Venus and Pisces. It was about being in nature with my friends, experimenting with drugs. I got really into the transcendentalists like Walt Whitman and Emerson and Thoreau. So there was this kind of like, you know, artistic, but also kind of like spiritual opening. Things were incredibly Venusian and easy. And when I look at that, I feel like there's a lot of that, has to do with where my Venus is placed.
Mm.
Um, my relationships with women were all beneficial and easy at that age. Um, so and then you can see, I won't go into what happened after that, but 21, like with my sun in Aries in the 6th house opposite Saturn, it was like, boom, that period of your life is over.
Big shift.
Yeah. Um, yeah. What about you? Do you have a Venus
Oh my,
story you can share?
did you see it on my face? Wow.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. Well, I have Venus in Scorpio, and I have reflected on this before through this lens of the Venus years, not seven, 14 to 21. And it's a very distinct phase of my life where mostly I will say I had a lot of shadowy experiences of how
Yeah.
Venus and Scorpio can look. And I I remember going through this phase right at that turning point where I was getting through a breakup. And I'm so embarrassed to even like admit, but I have worked with this over the years. I was going from like friend to friend to friend and like accepting dates and then being like, no, I can't do this. Like
Mm.
I'm not healed, and just basically ruining all of my male friendships
Oh, yikes.
because I was, it was kind of like I was being initiated into like the depth of what Venus and Scorpio can be, but I was so
Right.
not. I was
In
so
that Mars Plutonian, like, yeah, that's a very different Venus experience. Yeah.
yeah, and then the stinger, the scorpion stinger. I mean, I hurt a lot of my friends because
Yeah.
I was unskilled at Venusing, and
Right.
um, there was a very definite shift for me at 21 where I ended a long-term relationship that had some like Venusian Scorpio Venus betrayal in it, and also my relationship to women with like had so much betrayal during that
Yeah.
period of time. And then when I came out of that, it really did shift. Like my relationship with women really started to shift. I switched to my sun in Scorpio, so it's not like a totally different
Sure.
energy. I had been working with Scorpio through the
Right. The
Venusian.
sun brings the awareness of the Scorpio mystery, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what about with your kids? Can you talk to us
Yeah.
about
Well, I can think about
shifts?
my teenager. She uh, has Venus in Leo in the 12th house. And um, her favorite thing to do, and this is such a Venus 12th house Leo thing, is to be in her room with the shades drawn, listening to music, and she's an incredible artist, and she just creates like these beautiful masterpieces for hours in her room. But it's in this kind of like isolated um but very creative um place, um for hours and hours. So I see that as very, and she's got what I would say too, like with her um relationships, is there's also this like kind of deep love she has for her friends, but she also can maybe do some of that 12th house, like hiding it, or almost like Rapunzel in a tower kind of kind of vibe. So that all, to me at least, makes sense as Venus and Leo in the 12th.
So I imagine that one of the amazing gifts of this for you has been to just fully acknowledge that's exactly like what she needs to be doing, and that
Sure.
there's nothing that needs to change. So there's a lot of acceptance there.
Yeah.
And then I guess my follow-up question is, at at the point at which she was turning into this new phase, was there anything in particular that you did in order to assist her in that transition?
Mm.
Um, or any particular marker that you were aware of at that time as you witnessed a shift in her?
Yeah, it, it's interesting because I don't look at my kids' charts that often. And it hasn't been until she's been a teenager that I actually, when she kind of lets me know what's going on in her world, I will kind of look at the chart and be like, oh, isn't that interesting? Like, Mercury just retrograded um, in Aquarius, and on the day that it was went retrograde, she told me that she was gonna, um, break up with this boy she's been, you know, dating from like over the summer, and I just like laughed to myself. I was like, oh, that is a perfect, um, you know, interpretation of, you know, that Mercury retrograde. So I'll look at that and I'll talk to. She's definitely interested in astrology at this point. Too. Um, I mean, a big thing you notice at around when her actual Saturn opposition is more like around 15. Um, and the thing you really notice with that Saturn opposition and then the other Saturn opposition around 44, 45 is that is when kids really start to look older, right? So even though they're going through puberty, something happens around that Saturn opposition, and their bone structure changes. They go from looking more like 14 going on 12 to like 15 going on 18. Um, so that's another really interesting thing to watch. Um, and just that another big thing at the Saturn opposition that teenagers do is they start this whole word of like maturity, or like they're playing a little bit with like, can I be mature about things, and how do I feel about the mature people in my life or the adults in my life? It's like almost with that opposition they can kind of start to see the Saturn in a different way, or maybe things that they thought were stupid forever, all of a sudden they kind of are like, oh, I kind of see why adults maybe do this, or if their Saturn is kind of maturing.
Mm. Wow, Lucian, there's so much juicy material here for parents at every stage to work with. I am so grateful. And I would have like 50 more questions just on your bio. And so I'm a little sad to be ending, but I want to try and just summarize just a few like key ages that you pointed out in terms of milestones. The first 7 years being ruled by the moon. When we get to age 7, we're experiencing the first Saturn square, which
Yeah.
we can correlate with becoming more individualized, moving into Mercury development. We're ready to actually learn, versus the first 7 years where we're just learning by osmosis and
Right.
absorbing the light that was shown on us. I loved
Mm.
that metaphor that you used. Then around age 9, which happens in the second phase of 7 to 14, ruled by Mercury. 9.5, we have the nodal reversal, which can show up as a new friend or feeling different, or
I think of it as just as like a download of karma, right?
yes,
There's
right.
like we feel it in a different way than before at that point. And it's our own karma. It's not our family. And I think there's also just a general quickening of consciousness. I know that the pineal gland also fires up at that point too, which is all about regulating, dark and light. So there's also this awareness of like mean kids or evil or, the anxiety can really spike around that age, actually. There can
Mm.
be regressions of like, maybe they were having sleepovers with friends, but all of a sudden at 9.5, they like wanted to sleep with the light on, or
Mm.
yeah.
Okay, great. Then also in this second developmental stage of 7 to 14, we have another milestone at age 12 of when we have our first Jupiter return. And this can be associated with expansion, maybe learning of new things as well,
Well,
right?
and like literal physical, the growth spurt, that is 12 is also, Saturn definitely, the 14-year-old is puberty, but 12 also really um, uh, starts getting quite strong.
Hmm.
And you can look at Jupiter too as like the creative potential, the potential for growth. Um, I guess you could even see it in that sense of like becoming into reproductive uh, age. So yeah,
Great. And then the third developmental cycle, just during childhood, because we can keep going, right?
yeah,
Is 14 to 21, and it's ruled by Venus. Um, you mentioned beauty as religion. The arts are super important. Everything Venusian, like, really comes to light. Relationships, first love, popularity,
mm,
um, or little social dynamics. Um, And with all of these, we can work with them in their bare bones, just knowing what the framework is, or we can go to the chart and get really individualized insights for our children. For the first 7 years, we can look at the moon. For the second 7 years, we can look at Mercury and where they are and where it is in the chart. And for the third 7 years, looking at Venus in the chart and what she's doing, and just getting way more insights on what she particularly likes and where she expresses in your life or your child's life. And
awesome
again,
summary.
oh,
That was very succinct.
oh, well, thank you. And of course, there's so many things that I wasn't able to summarize. So the wonderful thing about recordings is that you can always go back.
Right.
Speaking of which, Lucian and I also created a couple of succinct recordings on pointed questions. So if you want to learn more from Lucian, you can look forward to those individual releases. We talked about supporting teens through anxiety right now and also always, and bringing more structure into your child's day and how astrology can support that. So that's kind of like a sneak peek of what's coming out. And Lucian, where can people find you if they want to know more or work with you?
Yeah, my website is lucianschlosscounseling.com. So that's an easy way to get a hold of me. Maybe we can put that in the chat. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or just on Facebook, either my normal page, which is just Lucian Schloss, or I have one that I sometimes use called Sacred Timeline Astrology. So you could like that if you want to follow me. And yeah, I I work with clients doing astrology and therapy and the constellation work. Um, and now via Zoom we can do it from anywhere in the world, which is awesome.
Yes. Oh, big expansion.
Yeah.
Um, Thank you so much, Lucian. This has been such a pleasure.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to get back on sometime because I have way more questions. Um, for any of you that have been looking forward to our moon sign PDF that's finally available, this is a compilation based on an episode that we did a little while back with Natasha Alter, going through the moon signs and what they say about your child in terms of their very particular needs and what nourishes them and what helps them feel safe. So, if you would love a place to start working with astrology and your child's chart, starting with the moon sign is really wonderful. Lucian and I spoke about the moon quite a bit today, so it could even support you in working with what Lucian's been discussing. And you can go to astrologyhub.com/moon sign, and it's free. It's just a downloadable PDF and it comes into your email. And once you get it, I would love to hear from you and just know if it's helpful or if you've used it and it was successful. And yeah, just really excited to be in conversation with all of you. I'm getting a lot of your questions. I'm doing my best to figure out the best ways to just support as many parents out there. So I would love your feedback. I'd love it if you share our episodes with parent friends that you have that could use extra support or insights or inspiration. And thank you so much for being a supporter and tuning in. We're here every Friday at 10 a.m. Pacific. And again, Lucian, thank you for being here and sharing your beautiful gifts with our community.
Thanks for having me.